Thank you for listening to Rearview Mirror Chronicles. To send me an email, please use rearviewmirrorchronicles@gmail.com, and to send me a message on WhatsApp, +60 16 425 6301. You knew, Emperor of India, Shah Jahan, that life, youth, wealth, renown all flowed away down the stream of time. Your only dream was to preserve forever your heart's pain. The harsh thunder of imperial power would fade into sleep, like a sunset's crimson splendor, but it was your hope that at least a single eternally heaved sigh would stay to grieve the sky. Though emeralds, rubies, pearls are all, but as the glitter of a rainbow trickling out empty air and must pass away, yet still one solitary tear would hang on the cheek of time, in the form of this white and gleaming Taj Mahal. That was the amazing Rabindranath Tagore, the great Bengali writer, and the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, writing about one of the world's most famous buildings in the world, the Taj Mahal. And I guess it could be a candidate for the world's most famous building, if not, definitely the world's most romantic building, because it was built for love. Hello, and welcome to Rearview Mirror Chronicles. My name is Keith Hockton. I'm a public historian, author, and broadcaster. Off the bat, I have to say that the Taj Mahal was the first building that physically took my breath away. Seeing it from a distance is something else completely, but actually seeing it up close, I literally, as I turned a corner and it came into view, I gasped. I must have stood admiring it for at least 15 minutes before actually then walking towards it and really trying to take everything in, which is almost impossible. So beautiful. And it's sort of seen as a symbol of India as well, of romance, of exoticism in the East. The image of the Taj Mahal is one that it's one that newspaper travel supplement editors will always reach for when they're trying to tell you about the trip of a lifetime. There's always a picture of the Taj there, or, stretching your horizons. The Taj Mahal is always the building that is featured in the center of that. It's iconic. I think it also stands for devotion, for marital love, and all of that kind of thing. And the most famous person who utilized it to that effect was Princess Diana in 1992, when she sat directly in front of it on her own without Prince Charles. Now that was a statement and a half, a very public statement. So it is absolutely a building that carries an entire freight of meaning, of significations. It's a symbol of India abroad, but it's also a great Muslim building built by Muslim emperors. And so in contemporary India, not entirely uncontroversial at this moment in time. So I thought that it would be a great theme for this week's podcast. For me, the Taj stands as an historical reminder of a period of history where the nature of the Mughal Empire and the Mughal courts was very much on display. And it speaks to that. And there are some contemporary issues surrounding it, as I mentioned. So it stands as a reminder, I think, to a time where things might have been a little bit better than they are right now. So to give you a bit of context, the Taj Mahal dates from the era of the Mughal emperors. And for those of my listeners who are not familiar with Indian history, the Mughal dynasty lasts from 1526 to 1858. They are a series of Muslim kings ruling over the region of South Asia, and they're of the Mongol line. So Babur, the founder of the Mughal dynasty, is the ruler of a principality, and that principality is Fergana. The Fergana Valley nowadays is primarily located in today's Uzbekistan. And so he's one of a series of Timurid princelings, so from the great empire of Timur. Now, his descendants are all vying for power in the Central Asian region, and Babur comes out of Fergana with the idea of trying to re-establish Timur's great empire. But he's not able to do so. He's not militarily strong enough. So he ends up taking the province of Kabul and establishing himself there, and from Kabul he looks into the region of South Asia as a potential area to conquer. In that, he's actually following Timur, because Timur had actually sacked the Delhi Sultanate in 1398. And so he has this idea in his mind that he can actually create a new empire for himself in that region. So just to be clear, he is descended from Genghis Khan, the greatest conqueror in history, and also from Timur. And if you are familiar with Elizabethan literature, he's better known as Tamburlaine, the kind of archetype of the great conqueror. So they have an absolute track record of going out and conquering places. And as I understand it, Babur wins this great victory that establishes himself in North India just outside Delhi. And then he goes on and he wins a battle in a place called Kanwar in 1527, which is outside the city of Agra, which is where in due course the Taj Mahal will come to be built. And that's just a coincidence, by the way. Agra was already a very important city in the region. It was the capital of the Delhi Sultanates, the Islamic rulers of the region prior to the Mughals, but Agra was an exceptionally important city by itself. And when Babur conquers the region of North Hindustan, as they called it back then, he sets up his first ever capital actually at Agra. So it all goes swimmingly well for the Mughals, and then it goes slightly wrong under his son, who ends up in Persia. Humayun, who is Babur's eldest son, when he inherits the new region, he's not as strong a figure as his father had been. He doesn't command the same loyalty as his father had done. So there are immediately contenders trying to take his kingdom from him, and he's actually run out of Delhi in 1540. He spends the next 15 years wandering, trying to get aid, and ultimately ends up at the court of the Shah in Iran. And with his help, he's able to come back and retake what had been his kingdom. And this then introduces a Persian influence. So when Humayun is able to come back, in terms of the artistic production of the court, some of the best court artists come back with him. First to Kabul and then to Delhi, and then others join him there. So in the area of painting, the Persian tradition is very strongly impacting what's quickly becoming Mughal. But in terms of architecture, Babur, having come out of Fergana, he'd spent time in Herat and Sikandra, and his successors do as well. So they actually know what the imperial Timurid architecture looks like and what it's meant to look like. And that's also becoming a very strong, impactful statement of what becomes Mughal style. And of course, there's a deep well of influences. There's Central Asia, there's Persia, there's the Hindu architecture of India, there's the Muslim architecture of India. The Mughals established themselves as the rulers of this kind of great swirl of influences and kingdoms. So Humayun comes back with his son Akbar, and he establishes himself much more securely than his father had. And then his son Jahangir, well, he's the ruler, but he's basically an alcoholic and an opium addict. But that doesn't take away from his role as emperor. I know he's gone down in history as one of these people who is completely ruled by his wife, and then there are historians that say that he didn't actually do anything. He was just interested in pleasure and partying. But you know what? He's actually one of my favorite Mughal emperors, and I think he's one of the most fascinating of them. He was definitely imperial. He was a proper ruler, even despite his addiction to drink and drugs. And of course, behind every great man is a very impressive woman. And his wife was called Nur Jahan, his last and favorite wife. And he marries her in 1612. She had previously been married and had a daughter from that first marriage. But after her first husband dies, she comes to the Mughal court and is in attendance on one of the elder royal ladies. And of course, this is where Jahangir meets her. He falls deeply in love with her, and they get married. And she's a very important, politically influential woman. And this is actually really important for the story of the Taj Mahal, because Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan, the man who will build the Taj Mahal, succeeds Jahangir, and his favorite wife, Nur Jahan, has an amazing niece that Shah Jahan also falls in love with. And look, I know this is all kind of very Game of Thrones sounding and a little bit incestuous, but bear with me. So Shah Jahan, before he's titled Shah Jahan, Prince Khurram, he's betrothed to Arjumand Bono Begum, who is Nur Jahan's niece. And that betrothal takes place in 1605. So actually, before Nur Jahan is even at court, Noor Jahan's father is also in the upper echelons of court hierarchy, as is her brother. So they're already an important family in the Mughal court, within the Mughal court administration. And her father is effectively Jahangir's prime minister. And these marriages between the royal family and the Khorasani family, they make the linkages between them even stronger. So the marriage between Khurram and Arjumand Bono Begum, who becomes Mumtaz Mahal, well, that happens in 1612, and Noor Jahan and Jahangir are married in 1611. So to give you some sense of the personality of Shah Jahan, he's more of an orthodox Muslim than his father ever was. He doesn't touch alcohol until he's basically forced to by his father on his 24th birthday. Jahangir actually makes him take a drink. And had he not done so, he probably would have never touched alcohol at all during his life. So he is a more orthodox figure. But he's not a fundamentalist. And this internal turn towards orthodoxy, it's actually really interesting and not frightening at all. It doesn't really have any effect on how he rules or his concept of rule. And in fact, 2 of his children end up as practicing Sufis. And that's totally tolerated and supported by him and his wife. So he is a more orthodox figure, and he's an amazing warrior. And his wife goes with him on every single campaign that he takes part in. And that's unusual. I mean, the Mughal court was peripatetic, so it does move around. It was never stationary for extended periods of time. And the harem did move around with the emperor as well. But for Mumtaz Mahal to accompany Shah Jahan on every single military campaign and effectively everywhere he went, well, that was unusual. There was very much a deep connection between the 2 of them. Mumtaz Mahal is actually the title that she was given, and that translates to select of the palace or the chosen one of the palace. So that then started me thinking, and I might be too overly romantic when I say this, but she must have been incredibly beautiful in every sense of the word. I mean, she gave him 14 children, so there must have been quite the bond between them. An incredibly deep bond between them for sure. And of the 14 children, 7 survived to adulthood. So the connection between them, I wonder what that was based on. You know, it's actually impossible to say, because what we're told about her in the court histories, which are all written by Shah Jahan's court historians, you know, obviously her beauty is extolled, her kindness of personality is extolled, her loyalty is extolled. So she must have been beautiful as well, I think. But that's not enough, right, to form the kind of bond that they had. One of the things actually, just on that, if I can quote from one of his court historians, and we're talking about a Muslim dynasty, we're talking about words that were written down for posterity. And one of Shah Jahan's court historians, when he's talking about the 2 of them, he writes that the mutual affection and harmony between the 2 had reached a degree never seen between a husband and wife, among the classes of rulers or among the other people. And this was not merely out of sexual passion. The excellent qualities, pleasing habits, outward and inward virtues, and physical and spiritual compatibility on both sides caused great love and affection. And this is written by a senior court historian called Kazani, who wrote it with Shah Jahan's permission. And actually, all of the histories that we have surviving that were written by court historians were actually written with Shah Jahan's approval. And to write something about your wife, something that meaningful and that deep, well, that's really out of the ordinary. It's not only out of the ordinary, it's actually really remarkable that the idea of the bond is extolled to such a high degree that there obviously was great sexual chemistry. That's extolled, you know, in these court histories. So all of it speaks to us in a way of the exceptional nature of the relationship between them. And keep in mind, Shah Jahan did actually have 2 other official wives who he consummated the marriages. And he actually had a child with the 3rd wife, but it was Mumtaz Mahal who got to him. It was Mumtaz Mahal who had his time and his love and his devotion. So it's actually ordinary is not the right word. It's actually reasonable to talk about this as a genuine love story, one of the great love stories of all time. And then she dies while he's on campaign in the Deccan in southern India on the 17th of June, 1631, while giving birth to their 14th child. And the scale of his grief is something genuine, and it's felt by one and all. From the court historians, we are told that he withdrew from the courts for an entire week and was in solitary mourning. And this is remarkable because the court activities under Shah Jahan achieved a very kind of rigid formulation, if you like. There were certain ceremonial activities which took place on a daily basis where he showed himself to the public, to his court, and he was always present. And we're told that when he came out after that week, he wore white, which is the color of mourning in Islam. He wore white for a very long period of time. His eyesight got so bad from the amount of tears he shed, he had to start wearing spectacles. And within a few years, his beard had gone completely white. So there was a very strong emotional reaction to her loss, a very strong physical reaction to her loss. And it led to the creation of this incredible monument that we're talking about today. So she has obviously not died in Agra, but she had been born there. But that's not why he decides to take her body back to Agra. At the time, Agra was the most important of the imperial capitals. So Agra, Delhi, and Lahore, up until about 1643, they are the three primary imperial capitals of the Mughal Empire. So the capital city moved between these three different cities. And Agra, at the time of Mumtaz Mahal's death, was where it was settled. So, that was definitely one of the reasons. But then also very quickly the concept of the Taj Mahal takes place. And the space that was needed for what was intended, the location, you couldn't have had that idea of this base of the Taj constructed in Delhi. It could have been Lahore, but Lahore was actually the least important of the capitals and also a bit more out of the central area of the empire. So Agra had the location as well as capital status. The Taj, to me, is the culmination of the Mughal aesthetic of architecture. It is the zenith of the classical style of Mughal architecture for sure, and it's also layered with symbolism. So the commemorative aspect of Mumtaz Mahal, but it's equally a monument built to commemorate Shah Jahan. And there's also layers of political symbolism associated with the monument as well. It's the epitome of the idea of mobile funerary architecture being representative of paradise. Paradise in the Quran, so there's layers of paradoxical symbolism associated with it as well, and I love that. It has stood as a monument that has captivated everyone who's seen it, me included. So it is this, I think, grand expression of Mughal building design. One of the other layers of symbolism as well is it's also speaking to the dynastic legacy of the Mughals, because the architecture of the Taj Mahal draws very heavily on Humayun's mausoleum in Delhi. So it's speaking to this long dynastic line and the political legitimacy of that line. So there's so many different layers of symbolism tied up in this monument. It's not just a simple building. And of course, there are rumors, and I love these, there are rumors that it takes 22 years to complete and that it involves 2,000 elephants, bringing materials from across the world. I love these stories, but they're absolutely Orientalist exoticizing, for sure. And of course, it's not even a slight exaggeration, it's a massive exaggeration. So the construction of the actual mausoleum, the white structure, it takes 4 years, from 1632 to 1636. And the entirety of the complex, because the whole thing is planned as one unit, because there's gardens and there's obviously the mausoleum and the garden forecourt, there's a commercial space, and of course, there's another amazing garden just across the river. So the full complex is completed by 1643. So that's 11 years. 11 years is what it took to build the entire complex. Another question that I had was, at the time that it's being built, is it obvious that this is something in a different league from previous mausoleums that have been built? Previous tombs. Or is this, at the time, is it perceived as being of a long tradition, the standard thing that you would do, that kind of thing? And the answer that I came to is that it's both, actually, because it's a new tradition of monumental built funerary structures by the Mughals. And we only have 4 monumental imperial tombs, keep that in mind. And the Taj Mahal is the accumulation of those. But it only ends up being an imperial tomb because Shah Jahan is later buried there. And one of the things to remember is that this zenith of this tradition, it's built for a queen. And in that aspect, there is a tradition of funerary monuments built for the queens, the empresses. But this is on a different scale for a female mausoleum. It actually surpasses monumental emperors' tombs that were built before it, the 3 that came earlier. And it is just the expression of perfection and refinement, which is encapsulated in the structure. But that is because of that double commemorative aspect, commemorating not only Mumtaz Mahal, but equally and more importantly, commemorating Shah Jahan as this perfect king of this perfect kingdom. And let's just take a short break for a message from our sponsor. Autonomous is your one-stop shop for your Malaysia My Second Home visa. But they are much more than that. When you sign up with Autonomous, you become part of a larger community, a community that cares about you in Malaysia. And that's important when you move to a new home. So for more information, call Autonomous or WhatsApp them on. Another question that I had, having been there, was that on the outer face of the southern gate that leads into the gardens, there's verses from the Quran, and I'll read one of them to you. O soul at rest, return to your Lord, you well pleased with him, and he well pleased with you. So enter among my chosen servants, and enter my garden. So it's a very devoutly Muslim expression of piety, of the yearning, I guess, to be reunited in the afterlife. But I just wonder, is that seen by contemporary Muslim opinion as being a little bit excessive? You know, this huge monument. Or is it actually seen as being an expression of piety? The answer that I came up with, because of the use of the Quranic phrases like that, is that it was actually an expression of piety. And there are 22 verses of the Quran on the structure of the complex, on the tomb and the gateway. And partly because of precedence, there is a longer tradition of associating mobile funerary gardens with the gardens of paradise. And this is continued across the Islamic world as well. But the Mughals actually take it to a different level. And these particular Quranic phrases, which are saying, as a believer, you enter the gardens of paradise, it has double symbolism. It's not only about the religious duty of Muslims, it's about the idea that you are walking into an earthly representation of the gardens of paradise. And there's that association very strongly created with the use of these inscriptions at the Taj Mahal. But there's a precedence because it's also on a mausoleum at Sikandra, which is just outside Agra, where the same kind of idea is being presented. That then started me thinking about the architecture and history of the Taj Mahal and the ways in which it has been received over the centuries. So the Taj Mahal in translation actually means the crown of the palace. But that's not how the Mughals themselves referred to the monument in their writings, and they referred to it as the illuminated tomb. And we know that this is a contemporary name because we know it's referenced in certain European sources. So it appears to be a corruption of Mumtaz Mahal's name being applied to the building by Europeans. The other rumor that went around that I'd read much about was that the architects and the craftsmen were all executed when they'd finished the building so that they could never build anything as beautiful ever again. And as I say it, it's so Arabian Nights, isn't it? But of course, that is another Orientalist fantasy. The craftsmen and the architects and the supervisors are entirely too valuable for something like this to happen. And this is an idea which gets applied to many buildings, many famous buildings throughout history. And there is this idea that the Oriental despot, if you like, despotic figure does this kind of thing on a regular basis, but it's just not true. But the fact that we have stories like this being spread by Europeans, the fact that they have their own name for the illuminated tomb, the Taj Mahal, and that the name that the building comes to get suggests that this is a building that is seen by foreigners as well as by people in the Mughal Empire as being an exceptional structure. And I would love to tell you more about how European contemporaries see the Taj Mahal as it's being built. But just before we come to that, let me just finish off the story of Shah Jahan, which is actually tragic. I mean, it's enough that he's lost his beloved wife, but then it gets even worse. So Shah Jahan falls ill in 1657, and he's very ill, and there's a fear that he's not going to survive. Now, he has 4 sons, and one of them, the eldest and his favorite, Dara Shako, has been designated the heir apparent. So he is the one who is planned to succeed his father. In a modern sense, he's very much the Justin Trudeau or the Jacinda Ardern. You know, he's very liberal. He's multicultural, you know, all that kind of thing. And he's also a practicing Sufi, and he's been, you know, raised and brought up with the intention of him taking over. He was Shah Jahan's favorite, as I mentioned, and he will be the next emperor. But when Shah Jahan falls ill, a war of succession breaks out. The other brothers, the other 3, decide they're definitely not on board with Dara Shako becoming the next ruler, and so they start to gather their own forces, and they make alliances between the 3 of them: Shah Shuja, Aurangzeb, and Murad Bakesh. And what they decide to do is to dethrone Dara Shako. They want him out of the picture. And Aurangzeb, he's being very sneaky, let's just say. He's telling his other brothers that he's not interested in being on the throne, that he has no interest in taking over as emperor, and that he will support them in their bid to do so. I will help you militarily. And Aurangzeb is actually a great military mind. And together, he tells them that they're going to work together to make sure that Dara Shako doesn't get on the throne. So even after Shah Jahan gets better, and as I said, he was very, very ill for about a month, but he does get better. But by then, the wars between the brothers have already started. It's too late for him to step in, too late for them to pull back. And what ultimately happens is that Aurangzeb becomes the victor in this war. With his brother's help, he's able to have Dara Shako captured, and Dara Shako is then executed. But before he's executed, they decide that they're going to humiliate him. And he's led through the streets of Delhi in chains. And there's the idea that, you know, you want to protect this person who up until this point is adored and loved. And it was known by one and all that he was intended to be the next emperor. So to publicly humiliate him in this fashion is all part of the idea of them breaking down the myth of Dara Shako, because Aurangzeb has a very clear idea that actually he is going to be the next one on the throne. And he needs to make sure that he's the one who commands the respect of the people. And of course, no surprise, he then backstabs his other brothers and claims the throne for himself. He then imprisons Shah Jahan in the fort in Agra, the Red Fort, where for the next 8 years he lives in the confines of the palace. And then when he dies, Aurangzeb has him buried in the Taj Mahal next to his mother. So when Shah Jahan dies, his body is taken by river quietly in the dead of the night, and one of his other children, Jahanara, who was hand in glove with Dara Shako, she was also imprisoned in the Agra fort with her father, and actually after Mumtaz Mahal's death, she was the first lady of the empire. She had the status of queen, even though she was a princess. So her intention after her father dies is that there will be a grand procession through the streets to honor him as his body is taken to the Taj. But instead, it's taken, as I've mentioned, in the dead of night by river to the mausoleum and buried there without really any kind of pomp and ceremony whatsoever. It's not until Aurangzeb himself comes to Agra roughly a month after Shah Jahan dies that any kind of grand celebrations of mourning happens. But of course, now they happen with him in tow. And of course, Aurangzeb is now emperor, and there can be no question about who rules his father's estate, who is now dead. There was quite an interesting story from a French jeweler, a Travenet, who visited India in the middle of the 17th century, who wrote in his diary saying that Shah Jahan had actually plans to build his own mausoleum on the other side of the river, a black mausoleum. but that these thoughts, these plans were interrupted by the war between the brothers. And Aurangzeb basically scrapped that idea and shoved him in the Red Fort and then buried him in the Taj Mahal with his mother. But is there any truth in that? Archaeologically, there isn't any. And historically, from a Mughal perspective, they're actually, based on their records, there isn't any proof of that ever being thought of. I mean, Shah Jahan was an incredible architectural patron, and his stories are full of his different building projects and lots of kind of detailed information about them. It's basically how we know so much about the history of the construction of the Taj Mahal. And I can tell you definitively, there's no mention whatsoever of him planning a mausoleum for himself across the river from where the Taj now stands. Look, that being said, it's entirely possible that he may have done that had he not been deposed by his son. But up until that point, there had been no indication that he was planning to build his own tomb. So Travane is the first to mention this idea, and it's just with a few lines in his diary. There's also no mention about materials being bought. There's no mention about a replica of the Taj. So those ideas which come about later were given further credence by the fact that, I mentioned this was one huge complex that was built, and there was definitely a garden that was built across the Taj from the river. And if you go there, you'll see it. And it's quite amazing because you can stand in that garden, and when the river's flowing, you get this amazing reflection of the Taj in the river. In that garden, there's an octagonal tank. It's actually a water tank right in the middle of the garden. So when that was unearthed, it made people kind of think that, well, maybe these are the actual foundations for the octagonal Taj Mahal that Shah Jahan intended. But that's definitely not the case. They weren't foundations, and it was just a water tank. So I think it's a lovely romantic idea that he was intending a black Taj for himself, immediately opposite the white Taj Mahal that was built for his wife. But there's absolutely no proof of that. What I think is also fascinating about the Taj Mahal is that it's not just the people at Shah Jahan's court who recognize the power of the building. There's Europeans as well. So there's another Frenchman. There seems to be a lot of Frenchmen traveling at this time. A guy called Francois Bernier, who's actually a physician, and he's writing this as the Taj is actually being constructed. I mean, imagine being there while that's taking place. And he says that this monument deserves much more to be numbered among the wonders of the world than the pyramids of Egypt. So that's an incredible thing to say about a building that's actually being constructed. And of course, then the question arises, to what extent do we think the global fame of the Taj Mahal owes to foreign admiration? I mean, there's often this kind of tendency that foreigners admire things more than people who actually live in their own country. It's the old adage, if you live in Paris, you never go to the Eiffel Tower. If you live in New York, you never go to the Empire State Building, because it's there. So that then had me thinking, do we think that foreign admiration was right there from the start? I actually think it was, because we have accounts like Bernier's, and they're speaking to how incredibly striking and beautiful this monument is. What's really interesting is that we actually have records, contemporary records, of Europeans who are visiting and who are proclaiming about the beauty of this site. And not only that, the magnificence of this site. And one of them, he's been in the empire. He's traveled throughout the empire. And he writes about how it's one of the most beautiful buildings he's ever seen. But then he kind of questions himself. It's like, is this because I've become used to the local aesthetic? And maybe it's just in my head because I'm so enamored with India. And it's not until a visitor comes and proclaims, like Bernier, about the beauty and the immense singularity of the Taj Mahal, that he's like, okay, it is actually as beautiful as I think. So at this stage, there's lots of French people going on about how wonderful it is. Then the British capture Agra in 1883. Now it's under their control. And there's another story about one of the first viceroys. I think it was Lord William Bentinck, who they said was actually planning to demolish the Taj Mahal and auction off the marble. But apparently that's not true either. He was no Lord Elgin. But the viceroy who really becomes, and I mean obsessed by the Taj Mahal, and does a great deal to preserve it, is Lord Curzon. And I remember a story about him while he was in India. You know, he actually wanted to open a window while he was in the residency, and he couldn't find a servant. There was no servant to be found to do it for him, and he couldn't open the window by himself. So he actually just picked up a massive log and threw it through the pane of glass. Curzon, I suppose, was the kind of epitome of the Edwardian British ruler. And there's a famous verse that follows him around from his time at Oxford, and it goes like this. My name is George Nathaniel Curzon. I'm a most superior person. My cheek is pink. My hair is sleek. I dine at Blenheim once a week. And when he comes in as viceroy, so this, I think, is probably 1899, he actually really appreciates the Taj Mahal and he takes it very seriously. He is the first to kind of take it in, or take it in a way to, or take ownership of it actually, and responsibility for the monument. In terms of wanting to set forward a series of projects to conserve the monument, he's the first to restore it, to take care of it in a proper way, because it hasn't been taken care of in a while. Because there is a concept in Islamic societies, the concept of waqf, which is an endowment deed, which is written for every single construction. And the waqf for the Taj Mahal designated, you know, money for its upkeep and for the payments of the attendants and the like, and that kind of thing. Well, that existed up until about 1803. And then for whatever reason, the British stopped the waqf. So from that moment onwards, literally for the next 100 years, the Taj had actually started to deteriorate because no money was actually being put into its upkeep. So when Curzon comes along, he recognizes it as a site which needs to be protected, which needs to be conserved, and he puts a lot of effort into it. I think it was something like, I think he puts 40,000 rupees in a single year towards its conservation. And in the previous 20 years or something like it, it had been a fraction of that. So he's very serious about this particular building. And he continues to up the ante for the amounts of money which goes towards its upkeep. And he commissions this incredible lamp from lamp makers in Egypt to hang in the Taj, which is still there today. And Curzon, in my eyes, is very much, well, he's quite the Mughal figure. I mean, he obviously quite fancies himself as the heir of the Mughals, you know, kind of ruling India. And for all extensive purposes, that's exactly what he does. But there is also a sense in which, right into the 20th century, right the way up to India's independence in 1947, that the Taj is quite an influence on the way that the British start designing their own imperial structures. So the Victoria Memorial in Calcutta, for instance, and then with Edward Lurchins, who's an amazing designer who designs 4 buildings in New Delhi. I don't know if the Taj influences these designs themselves. I kind of suspect that they do, but certainly Mughal architecture does. The style of Mughal architecture and the concepts of their buildings absolutely does. Because, you know, that architecture actually brings the political power of architecture to the forefront. You're creating structures which are visual stamps of rulership and ownership on the land. And the British definitely did that. And the Mughal tradition of architecture is one which just projects imperial power and strength. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And so when the British are now in the ruling position and they're in a position where they're creating their own structures, they're drawing very heavily on Mughal tradition of architecture. And you end up with this idiosyncratic style of architecture, which is very kind of a British version of it, but it joins very heavily on the Mughal tradition because of the symbolic associations of it. And because the British value the building, you know, during the Second World War, the Taj that is, you know, it's actually covered in scaffolding, which is meant to protect it from Japanese bombing. And it's again covered in scaffolding when the war with India and Pakistan start in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So you can see that all the way through the ages, it's been a building that everybody has tried to protect. But when India becomes independent in 1947, the status of the Taj Mahal as a Muslim building means that it actually has a really unusual position in Indian iconography. It's the most famous Indian building of its time. It's a symbol of India abroad, but it's obviously not a Hindu building. And I would say that at the time of partition, especially in relation to the Taj Mahal, but other Mughal monuments as well, it didn't really matter so much because the Mughals were, and I would say still are, ingrained in Indian history. You absolutely wouldn't have had the modern country of India without this Muslim history. And what's really interesting now is that the current BJP government are so eager to deny it. And so at partition, the Taj becomes this symbol of the new country. But it's because it's considered a symbol of India. The fact that it's a Muslim structure doesn't really play into its symbolic association with the country whatsoever. It's just a symbol of the incredible historical power of the region of which the Mughals were embedded in. That's all. As I mentioned earlier, sadly, and I would say ashamedly, there's been a great push by the current BJP government, which is a Hindu majority government, to promote the very specific ideology Hindutva, which places the Hindu past of India on a platform which is meant to crush the other religions of the country. And I'm very sad that this is happening. And of course, it includes their Muslim past. And one of the ways that they've gone about doing this is to actually erase or try and erase the Muslim history of the region. So what do you do with a building that's that famous? I mean, one way it seems, as I was reading up on this, that there have been a number of court cases, one of which got taken to the Indian High Court and another to the Allahabad High Court, claiming that actually the Taj was originally a Hindu palace, which seems completely implausible. And thankfully, in both cases, it was thrown out. Obviously, it didn't work. But what's really frightening is that the court cases have proceeded to that next extreme level, where the idea... Actually, let me back up a bit. So these court cases have been undertaken by the BJP leadership in order to have the Taj Mahal proclaimed a Hindu structure. Because in their non-factual fantasy version of history, this was a Hindu temple dedicated to Lord Shiva that was built in the 12th century, and that it was stolen by Shah Jahan and then turned into the Taj Mahal. And as I said, this is a complete fantasy. It's a complete fabrication, and it's lies. What's really frightening, though, is that you have government bodies which are pushing this new version of history. So the court case, the one last year that went to the Allahabad court, there was actually a petition filed by one of the BJP leaders to have the chambers in the platforms of the Taj Mahal opened. I pause because every time I think about that, I'm just shocked. And there was a court case to have them opened because from the BJP was claiming that there were idols of Hindu gods hidden in those rooms, and that they had been hidden there since the construction of the monument, and therefore proving that it was a Hindu temple. One of the statements that he actually made to support his claim comes from the National Council of Educational Research and Training, which is the government body in India which approves what goes into the history textbooks and, all that kind of thing. And that body said there's no primary sources that exist to confirm Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal. Which, again, blows my mind because it's complete fantasy. Because we've actually got Mughal documents. We've got documents from the library and from the archives of the Rajas of Ambar, who were the original owners who sold the land to Shah Jahan and also supplied the marble for the construction. And we have all these European sources, these contemporary sources, speaking about what is happening, not just as the Taj Mahal is being built, but before they got there and afterwards. And so it's really actually quite frightening that you have this entire mechanism underway at the moment to support the idea that this monument is not Muslim and that it was Hindu. But you know what it does? It actually speaks to the incredible power of the visual when you see this structure. And of course, you have to think of Mughal power. You think of Shah Jahan, and you think of Mumtaz Mahal. And what the BJP wants is to remove that association and give it a Hindu association. And that says a lot about the power of this monument and how it's recognized centuries later. It's so upsetting when iconic buildings like this get pulled into the geopolitical arena. They should never be used for this purpose. This is a building that represents India on the world's stage, built for a sole purpose with a sole message, which is to love. And even if you didn't know the backstory definitely adds to it. And there is a sense of wonder when you see it for the first time. So it is an incredible story. I will leave you with those thoughts. Thanks everyone for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I'll be back very soon. Bye for now.